Hello and welcome to a live Deprogrammed with Keri Smith. I'm your host, Keri. Sorry, I've had some technical difficulties, so I appreciate you guys being patient. And if you give me 1 second, I think I still have a problem with this microphone. So I'm sorry, I'm doing this live. Give me 1 second. I have to plug one more thing in, and then we'll see. I think this will work. Oh, man. Okay, is that better? Maybe. Can you tell me? Is that better there? Okay, we're here. We're going. I think the microphone's fixed. Welcome. Hello to, I see some regulars in the chat. Hello, Pirate Tomsky. Thanks for being here today. Hey, Adam. Sorry for starting late, although I think some of you know we usually start about 5 to 10 minutes late, a little bit later than that today. I appreciate you hanging around. I hope you're having a great week so far. Das Pooch, already with the super chat. Thank you for the $10. Says Dawkins spent years crapping on Christianity and pushing atheism. Now he panics at the rise of Islam. Be careful what you wish for, DICK. And no, you can't have the benefits without the actual faith. Thank you for that. This is what we're talking about today. We are talking about Richard Dawkins coming out and saying that he is a cultural Christian, and we're discussing the positives of that and the negatives. And I've actually seen a lot of negativity about it and a lot of people sort of upset about it. And I wanted to talk about that because although I understand some of it and I understand this part of your Das Pooch, I understand the part about be careful what you wish for. Absolutely. If you have spent your career or your life trying to attack the concept of God, or people's belief in God, or spent your career, your life attacking Christianity, and then you see those effects in society of Christianity declining and falling away, it's sort of like, well, I mean, you were a little bit a part of the problem. That's sort of maybe why we're here, right? On the other hand, I don't actually know if I agree with the last part of your super chat. And we can talk about that today, and I hope I can explain what I mean by that. I do think that there are positive effects of Christianity that filter down. Any society, healthy society, is made up of healthy families, in my opinion, and in many people's opinion. And in those healthy families, of course, those are made up of healthy individuals. And being a Christian, I believe that individuals are healthiest, families are healthiest if they are Christian, if they believe in God, if they hold themselves to a higher moral standard, if they hold themselves to something outside of themselves. And I do believe that when a culture cultures change over time. Currently, we're in the middle of a culture that has embraced social justice as its dominant faith or religion. And what happens is you have a small minority of people who are true believers in social justice, and they have steered the culture in this direction. But the majority of people who align with social justice and have adopted that as their faith, I think they do so casually. I don't think that they have really thought about it. I don't think they're sincere believers. I think most people are followers. If you look at the Ash conformity experiments, which I talk about a lot because it really helped me to understand human nature a little bit better. If you look at those experiments, I think they show you that as many as 75% of people possibly just follow wherever the culture goes. They are conformists. And I think that might be true no matter what the dominant belief system is. So if it's woke, 75% of those people are just following. They're just conforming to what's dominant, keeping up with the Joneses. They want to be thought of as good people. They want to believe the things their neighbors believe. And I think that's probably true when a culture is predominantly Christian. I do. I think that probably the number of sincere believers is a lot smaller than the number of people who outwardly adhere to Christian beliefs or claim to be Christian. I think maybe 75, if you have a culture that's predominantly Christian, maybe as many as 75% of those people are just sort of there because that's what's popular. They're conforming to the current culture. And what I think Dawkins is saying, and what I agree with, is that culture, society does better when the predominant faith is Christianity. And I do think if we lived in a culture at this time in history that was predominantly Christian, I do think there would be benefits on a societal level for everyone, regardless of whether they believed or not. And they probably would take those for granted. You know, he probably took those for granted for years, Dawkins did. So I do think you can have some of the benefits in society without having the actual faith. And so I hope I explained that well, but that's what we're going to talk about the whole time. So thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate it. Christian when convenient, says B. Allen. Yeah, I think that's true for any belief system, though. I think a lot of people right now are woke because it's convenient, because it's popular, right? So let's get into it. If it's your first time here, this is a live show that I do on Mondays and Fridays. Sometimes we have guests. We talk about what's in the news. We talk about pop culture. We talk about culture, how it relates to ideology, and sometimes we talk about politics. But, you know, I want to reiterate this. I've been trying to make sure I mention this lately for any new people. This is not Deprogrammed is not a political channel, although we do get into politics necessarily sometimes because politics are downstream from culture. But, you know, I've seen some people that I've met out in the real world who, when they find out what I do or they find out about the show, they think it's political. Oh, you know, and they put a bunch of labels on me or on the channel and, it's right wing or it's conservative or what have you. Whatever label you think, you know, go ahead with that. I don't personally think of it as a right-wing channel. I don't think of it even as a political channel. And you are welcome here no matter what your persuasion. We just ask that you be somewhat civil in the chat. You can disagree, but be civil when you do it. Don't be a jerk. Okay. We also have our resident atheist mod, Pirate Tomsky, who I mentioned earlier here today. So Pirate, I'm very much looking forward to your thoughts about the subject and the thoughts of other atheists in the chat. So let's get started. This has been in the news recently. Richard Dawkins, who has been very critical of Christianity for his whole life and career, very famous atheist, recently caused quite a stir when he said in an interview that he considers himself a cultural Christian. He said the way that some people consider themselves culturally Jewish or culturally Muslim, but not actually having the faith, just enjoying the benefits of the culture that comes from that belief system. And he also stated that he thought that Christianity, it would be a very disastrous thing if it stopped being the predominant culture. And this caused quite a stir and some surprising reaction. So let's just start with the clip from the interview that was getting shared around. It was really surprising for me to see this from Dawkins, but not surprising on the whole, because I've seen a lot of atheists recently talking about the concept of cultural Christianity, talking about the benefits of a Christian culture, people who don't believe, but who can recognize and appreciate things about Christianity. I think that that's sort of on the rise. I don't know what you guys think. Tell me what you think in the chat or in the comments. But I've noticed more, even among my friends who are atheists, more people opening their mind to the possibility of God, or if not that, at least opening their mind to the possibility that they've been prejudiced against Christianity as a belief system in the past. So let's play this clip.
Well, I must say I was slightly horrified to hear that Ramadan is being promoted instead. I do think that we are culturally a Christian country. I call myself a cultural Christian. I'm not a believer, but there's a distinction between being a believing Christian and being a cultural Christian. And so, you know, I love hymns and Christmas carols, and I sort of feel at home in the Christian ethos. I feel that we are a Christian country in that sense. it's truth that statistically the number of people who actually believe in Christianity is going down, and I'm happy with that. But I would not be happy if, for example, we lost all our cathedrals and our beautiful parish churches. So I count myself a cultural Christian. I think it would matter if we substituted any alternative religion. That would be truly dreadful.
Well, which brings me to my supplementary point, which is that, as we know, church attendance is plummeting, but the erection of mosques across Europe, I think 6,000 are under construction, and there are many more, are being planned. So do you regard that as a problem? Do you think that matters?
Yes, I do, really. I mean, I don't, I have to choose my words carefully. I mean, if I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time. I mean, it seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion, in a way that I think Islam is not.
I think you're going to have to explain why you say that, Professor Dawkins. Why is Islam fundamentally not decent like Christianity?
Yes, I mean, the way women are treated. I mean, Christianity is not great about that. It's had its problems with female vicars and female bishops and things. But there's an active hostility to women, which is promoted, I think, by the holy books of Islam. I'm not talking about individual Muslims, who, of course, are quite different. But the doctrines of Islam, the Hadith and the Quran, is fundamentally hostile to women, hostile to gays. And I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
Okay, so there you go. Now, just based on the reactions I've seen online, I expect that to bother a lot of people. Some atheists and some Muslims and some Christians have been very bothered by this. But I was a little confused. I wanted to play it and see what you guys think, because when I first heard this, I thought, this is positive. Coming from someone who's spent so much of his career attacking Christian faith and attacking, in some ways, like Christians themselves, people who believe, it was surprising to me, and I found it but pleasantly surprising, because, as I mentioned, I've started to see more people both in the public eye and people that I know on a personal level, anecdotally, who are not believers, but who are kind of opening the door a crack to consider, at the very least, positive values within a Christian society, and to recognize those and to acknowledge them in maybe a way they hadn't done before. And then, to go a step further, I've seen some people, I'm not talking about Dawkins here, of course, because he makes it very clear he doesn't believe anything about God. But I have seen some friends and public figures who are non-believers, who've even opened the door a crack to consider the possibility of God, who've even opened their minds and their hearts that far. And so I consider this a positive thing overall. And I understand I think I understand some of the criticism. If you have specific criticism, you can drop it in the chat and we can talk about it. But I want to show you a couple things I think that are leading to the criticism. So one thing, I don't think I mentioned this on the show. I don't think I covered it previously, although I did post about it. One of Richard Dawkins' friends, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she recently came out as Christian. Not just as a, cultural Christian like Dawkins is doing, but saying, I've converted. I am a believer in Jesus Christ. And he had a very negative reaction to that. And that was very recently. That was in November of 2023. So since I haven't covered it before, I just wanted to get into this a little bit as well. And when this happened, I saw a couple of friends. Oh man, I saw one staunchly atheist friend who took this very hard, kind of like Dawkins. He was very upset. He said, this is terrible that she's converted. This is going to be a blow to atheism and to libertarianism. And he really had a negative reaction to it, which I don't know, I found that kind of surprising. Like, why does it bother you so much what she believes, that she's come to find God? I think, as a Christian, of course, I think it's amazing, and I hope, as I do with any of these stories of conversion that have been in the news recently, I extend good faith to people. I hope that they are sincere, and I want them to be true. And so until someone gives me reason to believe otherwise, I extend that good faith. I know there's been a lot of controversy lately about an OnlyFans porn star, Nala, who's been in the news a lot. She was on Michael Knowles' program. She recently quit OnlyFans, dedicated her life to God, and there's been just unending controversy about, is it sincere? Is it not? The same thing happened when Kat Von D converted, and I'm not a naive Pollyanna. I'll say this to my critics about this. I'm not a naive Pollyanna. If somebody's not showing evidence of fruits of living, of walking the path of God, I'm not, I think I'm pretty aware of con artistry, and have become much better at being able to spot insincere grifters, if you will, people who say things they don't actually believe. But what I'm saying is, when people first convert, my natural reaction is not to go, "Oh, I don't believe that," like, I don't know. My natural reaction is praise God, and then I wait to see what happens, and I think that's kind of, I don't know. I just think that's more of a natural response. I think about, people are pointing out in Nala's case, for example, oh, well, she still looks this way, and she looks, her hair is bright red, and she looks like a porn star. And if she's sincere, she should change the way she. Do you? I don't know if these people, if their conversion moment was as recent as mine. Let me stop sharing this for a second, then I'll put it back up. I don't know if their conversion moment was as recent as mine. But I ask you, if you are a believer, to think back to when you first found God, that completely eye-opening, overwhelming, humbling, heart-changing, mind-changing moment. And just think back to the months and maybe years that followed as you were stumbling as a new Christian, finding your way. Everything didn't come at once. It wasn't okay, I believe in God, and now I am a biblical scholar and I understand all of God's word. It didn't come immediately. God worked on me. I don't know if this happened to you, but think back to your conversion moment. God worked on me. God pointed out my sin. God pointed out and still continues to point out the things that I cling to. And that comes through walking the path. That comes through practicing your faith, turning to the Bible, turning to God in times of hardship and trials, and being convicted, continuing to be convicted. Like for Nala, for example, to say, "Oh, she found God, therefore immediately I would expect to see this and this and this from her." I just think that's a bit unrealistic, and I think that's not how it works. I think it's more, human nature is such that even when you've had this life-changing, transformative moment, you've still got your Adam nature. You still got that part of you that's clinging to things from the past, from the old self. So for months after I found God continued to put those verses about the old self and the new self in front of me, about sexual morality, about all kinds of things. I continued to be confronted with those. If I opened up the Bible, it would happen to be on one of those verses. When I would go to church, they would happen to be preaching on those verses. It continued to be friends, or things people would say, it would be about those verses. And so he just kept poking me about this, and until I came to understand and have a heart change. I'm like, no, I have to change the way I behave on this issue or this issue or this issue, because my heart has changed. And so I guess all of this is to say that I would hope that we would extend a little more grace when we first hear about new converts. I'm not saying to abandon your skepticism or discernment. I'm just saying, in those first moments, the heart can go to one of two places, I think. And I think it's better to go to, I hope this is real, rather than I hope this is wrong. I hope this is fake, and I hope to be proved right that it was fake all along, you know? Um, so that's kind of what I think about Nala. Okay, but let's get into Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Oh, also, one other quick thing about Nala. I did hear, and I haven't confirmed this, but I did hear that she supposedly started some kind of ministry. I don't know if that's true. I've heard so many things about her that have turned out to be not true, so I don't know. I do agree with if that's true, I do agree with the criticism that, you just found God. You should not be preaching to others. I absolutely agree with that. The scripture is very clear about who is called to be, who shows the character traits of being a deacon or an elder or a leader in the church. And one of those things is someone who's been in the faith for a long time, is wise, has discernment, exhibits continued fruits of their beliefs, and for people who just, I found God and now I'm going to be a preacher. It's, yes, if that's really what's happening, I do think that's very unwise. I agree with that criticism. Okay. I just want to read some of Ayaan Hirsi Ali's statement when she became a Christian, because the way Dawkins responded, I also have his response pulled up, was very uncharitable and really kind of gross, in my opinion. And so I think some people are remembering that this was so recent. So she shared this on Unheard, UNHERD. The headline is "Why I Am Now a Christian. Atheism Can't Equip Us for Civilizational War" by Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Let me make this a little larger. In 2002, she says, I discovered a 1927 lecture by Bertrand Russell entitled "Why I Am Not a Christian." It did not cross my mind as I read it that one day, nearly a century after he delivered it to the South London branch of the National Secular Society, I would be compelled to write an essay with precisely the opposite title. The year before, I had publicly condemned the terrorist attacks of the 19 men who had hijacked passenger jets and crashed them into the Twin Towers in New York. They had done it in the name of my religion, Islam. I was a Muslim then, although not a practicing one. If I truly condemned their actions, then where did that leave me? The underlying principle that justified the attacks was religious, after all. The idea of jihad or holy war against the infidels. Was it possible for me, as for many members of the Muslim community, simply to distance myself from the action and its horrific results? At the time, there were many eminent leaders in the West, politicians, scholars, journalists, and other experts, who insisted that the terrorists were motivated by reasons other than the ones they and their leader, Osama bin Laden, had articulated so clearly, that Islam had an alibi. Sorry. This excuse-making was not only condescending towards Muslims, it also gave many Westerners a chance to retreat into denial. Blaming the errors of U.S. foreign policy was easier than contemplating the possibility that we were confronted with a religious war. Now, I'm just going to pause here for a second to say this tracks with my experience at that time as well. At that time, I was a leftist. I was godless. I was in the social justice or woke religion and faith. And I was one of these people who was trying in my mind to make it make sense, to do mental gymnastics, to blame the US and US foreign policy for what had happened, because I didn't want to be a part of Islamophobia. That's what the left does, is they push these things and say, if you ask these questions, if you acknowledge these facts, then you have this bigotry. And so I think she's right there. I was on the other side of this than she was at the time. We have seen a similar tendency in the past 5 weeks as millions of people sympathetic to the plight of Gazans seek to rationalize the October 7th terrorist attacks as a justified response to the policies of the Israeli government. We have seen that. I've seen some of the most disgusting arguments made about how these people at this music festival in Israel brought brought that terrorism, brought this brutality, this murder, this rape on themselves. I've seen that. When I read Russell's lecture, I found my cognitive dissonance easing. It was a relief to adopt an attitude of skepticism towards religious doctrine, discard my faith in God, and declare that no such entity existed. Best of all, I could reject the existence of hell and the danger of everlasting punishment. Russell's assertion that religion is based primarily on fear resonated with me. I had lived for too long in terror of all the gruesome punishments that awaited me. While I had abandoned all the rational reasons for believing in God, that irrational fear of hellfire still lingered. Russell's conclusion thus came as something of a relief. When I die, I shall rot. That's what he said. I'm also going to pause here because this is something I've been thinking about a lot about recently. And my pastor, Bradley Helgerson at Church on the Square, which you can find on YouTube, he just shared a sermon online that I got to see in person. It was a great sermon in which he talked about, as Christians, we are called to both love and fear God. And it can go wrong when people live in like only one of those places. So you can see it going wrong on the left. You can see it going wrong in these woke social justice, so-called Christian churches, so-called, where they're basically saying God loves everyone and everything and every behavior, and no matter what you do, and God is all about love, and we love God, and we can do whatever we want, and anything goes, and any behavior is permissible, and it's okay. And they are they speak only of God's love. They don't speak of God's judgment. They don't speak of God's wrath. They don't have any fear or respect for God and God's word, God's commandments. They're just in that one place, right? Then on the other hand, I think it can go wrong, or I've heard him talk about this, how it can go wrong when people only live in fear of God, a fear of judgment. They forget all of God's love, mercy, redemption, grace, the ultimate sacrifice for our sins. Like they forget all of that, and they live just in this place of fear. And just in this place of, doing the work, to borrow a leftist phrase, but thinking that salvation comes through works, because of this fear of what'll happen otherwise. And so both of those are completely imbalanced. And I have met a lot of former believers. She's talking about being, leaving her religion of Islam, but I've also met a lot of people who've left their Christian faith because I think they were only living in the fear part, and that was torturous for them, as it would be, because they didn't know God's love. I'm not a believer because, I'm afraid of what's going to happen if I'm not. I mean, I am afraid of that, but I'm a believer because I know God's love. I know what He's done for me when I converted. I know how life is so much different. I know how life is full of color. I know how it makes sense in a way it never did before. Atheists, bear with me. I know this is going to be an annoying episode, or if you need to leave, just leave. Like, Keri's talking about God's love. I'm leaving. But I thought that was important because she's talking about that fear. And I think a lot of people, especially non-believers, that's what they think it is. They think it's just about the fear. And so, of course, that would cause her to abandon a faith in God. So she says, to understand why I became an atheist 20 years ago, you first need to understand the kind of Muslim I had been. I was a teenager when the Muslim Brotherhood penetrated my community in Nairobi, Kenya in 1985. I don't think I had even understood religious practice before the coming of the Brotherhood. I had endured the rituals of ablutions, prayer, and fasting as tedious and pointless. The preachers of the Muslim Brotherhood changed this. They articulated a direction, the straight path, a purpose, to work towards admission into Allah's paradise after death, a method, the Prophet's instruction manual of do's and don'ts, the halal and the haram. As a detailed supplement to the Quran, the Hadith spelled out how to put into practice the difference between right and wrong, good and evil, God and the devil. The Brotherhood preachers left nothing to the imagination. They gave us a choice: strive to live by the Prophet's manual and reap the glorious rewards in the hereafter. On this earth, meanwhile, the greatest achievement possible was to die as a martyr for the sake of Allah. The alternative, indulging in the pleasures of the world, was to earn Allah's wrath and to be condemned to an eternal life in hellfire. Some of the worldly pleasures they were decrying included reading novels, listening to music, dancing, and going to the cinema, all of which I was ashamed to admit that I adored. The most striking quality of the Muslim Brotherhood was their ability to transform me and my fellow teenagers from passive believers into activists almost overnight. We didn't just say things or pray for things, we did things. As girls, we donned the burqa and swore off Western fashion and makeup. The boys cultivated their facial hair to the greatest extent possible. They wore the white dress like Taub wore in Arab countries, or had their trousers shortened above their ankle bones. We operated in groups and volunteered our services in charity to the poor, the old, the disabled, and the weak. We urged fellow Muslims to pray and demanded that non-Muslims convert to Islam. During Islamic study sessions, we shared with the preacher in charge of the session our worries. For instance, what should we do about the friends we loved and felt loyal to, but who refused to accept our dawah, invitation to the faith? In response, we were reminded repeatedly about the clarity of the Prophet's instructions. We were told in no uncertain terms that we could not be loyal to Allah and Muhammad while also maintaining friendships and loyalty towards unbelievers. It's really different than Christianity. If they explicitly rejected our summons to Islam, we were to hate and curse them. Here, a special hatred was reserved for one subset of unbeliever, the Jew. We cursed the Jews multiple times a day and expressed horror, disgust, and anger at the litany of offenses he had allegedly committed. The Jew had betrayed our prophet. He had occupied the holy mosque in Jerusalem. He continued to spread corruption of the heart, mind, and soul. You can see why, to someone who had been through such a religious schooling, atheism seemed so appealing. Bertrand Russell offered a simple, zero-cost escape from an unbearable life of self-denial and harassment of other people. I have to say, though, I do know and I do acknowledge that there are some people who claim to be Christian who behave in this same way. An unbearable life of self-denial and harassment of other people. But that's not how God commands us to live. For him, there was no credible case for the existence of God. Religion, Russell argued, was rooted in fear. Quote, fear is the basis of the whole thing, fear of the mysterious, fear of defeat, fear of death, end quote. As an atheist, I thought I would lose that fear. I also found an entirely new circle of friends, as different from the preachers of the Muslim Brotherhood as one could imagine. The more time I spent with them, people such as Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, the more confident I felt that I had made the right choice, for the atheists were clever. They were also a great deal of fun. So what changed? Why do I call myself a Christian now? Let me just go back up here for a second. She says this part where she says she thought when she became an atheist that she would lose that fear. That stands out to me. Because again, I think they have it wrong. The atheists who believe that the Christian faith is rooted in fear, I think they have it completely wrong. I think a rejection of God is rooted in fear. I think it's a fear of losing control, of not knowing everything, of not being the master of everything, of not being able to control certain things that happen in life. I think it's a fear of admitting you don't know everything, and sometimes a fear of looking stupid. People mocking you because you believe in God, that kind of thing. So it's very telling to me that she did not lose the fear. So what changed? Why do I call myself a Christian now? She says, part of the answer is global. Western civilization is under threat from three different but related forces. The resurgence of great power authoritarianism and expansionism in the forms of the Chinese Communist Party and Vladimir Putin's Russia. The rise of global Islamism, which threatens to mobilize a vast population against the West. And the viral spread of woke ideology, social justice ideology, which is what we talk about on this channel, which is eating into the moral fiber of the next generation. Yes. We endeavor to fend off these threats with modern secular tools, military, economic, diplomatic, and technological efforts to defeat, bribe, persuade, appease, or surveil. And yet, with every round of conflict, we find ourselves losing ground. We are either running out of money with our national debt in the tens of trillions of dollars, or we are losing our lead in the technological race with China. But we can't fight off these formidable forces unless we can answer the question, what is it that unites us? The response that God is dead seems insufficient. So too does the attempt to find solace in, quote, the rules-based liberal international order, end quote. The only credible answer, I believe, lies in our desire to uphold the legacy of the Judeo-Christian tradition. That legacy consists of an elaborate set of ideas and institutions designed to safeguard human life, freedom, and dignity from the nation state, and the rule of law to the institutions of science, health, and learning. As Tom Holland has shown in his marvelous book, Dominion, all sorts of apparently secular freedoms of the market, of conscience, of the press, find their roots in Christianity. And so I have come to realize that Russell and my atheist friends failed to see the wood for the trees. The wood is the civilization built on the Judeo-Christian tradition. It is the story of the West, warts and all. Russell's critique of those contradictions in Christian doctrine is serious, but it is also too narrow in scope. For instance, he gave his lecture in a room full of former, or at least doubting, Christians in a Christian country. Think about how unique that was nearly a century ago, and how rare it still is in non-Western civilizations. Could a Muslim philosopher stand before any audience in a Muslim country, then or now, and deliver a lecture with the title, Why I Am Not a Muslim? In fact, a book with that title exists, written by an ex-Muslim, but the author published it in America under a pseudonym. It would have been too dangerous to do otherwise. To me, this freedom of conscience and speech is perhaps the greatest benefit of Western civilization. It does not come naturally to man. It is the product of centuries of debate within Jewish and Christian communities. It was these debates that advanced science and reason, diminished cruelty, suppressed superstitions, and built institutions to order and protect life while guaranteeing freedom to as many people as possible. Unlike Islam, Christianity outgrew its dogmatic stage. It became increasingly clear that Christ's teaching implied not only a circumscribed role for religion as something separate from politics, it also implied compassion for the sinner and humility for the believer. This here, I'll come back to this part. I don't completely agree with her there, but I'll continue. Yet I would not be truthful if I attributed my embrace of Christianity solely to the realization that atheism is too weak and divisive a doctrine to fortify us against our menacing foes. I have also turned to Christianity because I ultimately found life without any spiritual solace unendurable, indeed very near self-destructive. Atheism failed to answer a simple question: what is the meaning and purpose of life? This is why we're about to see Dawkins' criticism of her, and I think he's missing this part. So he's only hearing, she's starting off explaining from a rational perspective, because again, she's coming from the rational atheist, classical liberal or libertarian community. So of course she would be speaking to the people who are still in that world, who don't understand her change of heart and her change of mind. It's sort of like when I left social justice, the first essay I wrote, once I got over my fear of talking about it, the first essay I wrote was called Why I Left the SJW Cult, or on leaving the SJW cult and finding myself. And when I wrote that, without even thinking about it consciously, my audience was the people I was walking away from. My audience was the people who had been my community, the woke leftists, the social justice left, that whole world, and trying to explain to them, because I cared about them, and trying to explain what was so bad, what I thought, what I had come to find was so awful about our belief system, the social justice and woke belief system. So of course, when she's writing this essay, that's her whole world. That's her community. That's who she's writing to. She's starting with these appeals to reason. Here are the reasonable and rational reasons why I am choosing Christianity. She's laying it out for those people to see that. But then she gets to the personal and spiritual part here. Atheism failed to answer a simple question: what is the meaning and purpose of life? That tells me she had those heart-wrenching moments that I had where I was conflicted and wondering, like, I was asking those same big picture questions. What's the meaning and purpose of life? Do we have a soul? Is there a God? Who am I? Who is God? Like those things that build the foundation of not only a belief system, but of a relationship with God. If you open your heart and your mind to the possibility that he exists. I was plagued by those questions, and I can tell that she was as well. Okay, so atheism failed to answer a simple question: what is the meaning and purpose of life? Russell and other activist atheists believed that with the rejection of God, we would enter an age of reason and intelligent humanism. Gosh, how wrong they were. Oh my, how wrong they were. It's almost like I've heard people talk about the Nietzsche quote where he said God is dead, but he was saying that in the context of, if humanity, society is killing a belief in God, what comes next? Something awful could rush in to take that place. And I would argue it has. That human beings, I believe, as a Christian, we were created by our loving creator to worship. And we will find other things to worship. We will find other rituals. We will find other things if we don't put it where it should be. We will some people make the state, they make government their god. Some people make consumerism their god. Some people make the self, narcissism, their god. They make their physical appearance, their level of sexual attractiveness, all of these things that they bow down to and put primary and put all of that adoration onto and put faith in. Some people think during the COVID years, people made the government and they made pharmaceutical companies their god. I mean, they were getting tattoos of Fauci and Pfizer and stuff on their arms, like, it unbelievable to me. But I think that's sort of human nature that happens. If you haven't seen it, I got to do a conversation on this channel with my friend and atheist, James Lindsay, and my pastor, Bradley Helgerson from the Church on the Square. And we were talking about whether or not this cultural war, woke or social justice, whether or not it's also a spiritual war. And we agreed on so much. It's a very interesting conversation. I think you should go and watch it if you haven't. But one of the things we disagreed slightly on was James Lindsay being an atheist. I think he sort of agreed, and I'm going to show a clip from him in a second where it seems that he maybe agrees even more today, that most people, he was sort of saying, yes, I agree that most humans are built to worship and they need something in that God hole, if you will. Where we disagreed was that he seemed to be thinking from the perspective of someone who doesn't believe. He was saying, but maybe not all of us. I don't need that. I don't need a God. So that was like one interesting difference of opinion there. I think everyone needs God. I do. And I don't mean that to sound insulting or, condescending. I just think, I think everyone benefits, obviously, from that forgiveness, from that love, from that grace and salvation. I believe your soul is at stake. So, but in terms of practice, I believe even someone like James Lindsay, although I couldn't point to it, I believe everyone worships something if it's not God. So I'm going to continue with this section and then I'll get to the chat. I'm not really paying attention to the chat right now because I want to make sure I can untangle my thoughts while reading this. Okay. So she says, Russell and other activist atheists believed that with the rejection of God, we would enter an age of reason and intelligent humanism. But the God hole, the void left by the retreat of the church, has merely been filled by a jumble of irrational quasi-religious dogma. She's right. The result is a world where modern cults prey on the dislocated masses, offering them spurious reasons for being in action. Social justice gives people it gives them a sense of meaning and purpose. Even if what it has them doing is in the service of evil, they feel like they're doing something good. So she continues, mostly by engaging in virtue signaling theater on behalf of a victimized minority or our supposedly doomed planet. Yes. Yes, yes, underline that. The line often attributed to G.K. Chesterton has turned into a prophecy. Quote, when men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything. On the whole, you may be the one atheist sitting there going, this isn't me, you know, but on the whole, wouldn't you agree that seems to be true about mankind? In this nihilistic vacuum, the challenge before us becomes civilizational. We can't withstand China, Russia, and Iran if we can't explain to our populations why it matters that we do. We can't fight woke ideology if we can't defend the civilization that it is determined to destroy. And we can't counter Islamism with purely secular tools. To win the hearts and minds of Muslims here in the West, we have to offer them something more than videos on TikTok. The lesson I learned from my years with the Muslim Brotherhood was the power of a unifying story embedded in the foundational texts of Islam to attract, engage, and mobilize the Muslim masses. Unless we offer something as meaningful, I fear the erosion of our civilization will continue. And fortunately, there is no need to look for some new age concoction of medication and mindfulness because Christianity has it all. That is why I no longer consider myself a Muslim apostate, but a lapsed atheist. Of course, I still have a great deal to learn about Christianity. I discover a little more at church each Sunday, but I have recognized in my own long journey through a wilderness of fear and self-doubt that there is a better way to manage the challenges of existence than either Islam or unbelief had to offer. Okay, so that's Ayaan Hirsi Ali's piece on why she is no longer an atheist, why she's now Christian. She published that in November. I loved reading it again. I think she's very sincere. That's what I think. Until it's have reason to believe otherwise. I'm gonna get to some of these. Let's see. Therese, hey Therese, she says, this is from earlier, like Hollywood invoking God yet acting sinfully, or Biden claiming to be a devout Catholic. Yes, I think you're talking about the majority of people being followers and they just sort of signal that they're a part of whatever the dominant belief is or dominant belief system. Joe Biden behaving in what I would call demonic ways and claiming to be Catholic. Okay. Andrew Joyner for £5. Thank you, Andrew, for the super chat. Says, my main issue with Dawkins is that he seems to conflate atheism with science. Yes, he does. He's also, I will say, condescending. And someone replied to when I shared that I was going to be talking about this topic today. Someone said they sort of lumped Dawkins in with James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson and sort of, why should we care what these atheists have to say about Christianity or what Christians should do? And I see a distinction between Dawkins and the other two. Maybe I've missed it, but I've never read I've never read condescension or contempt from Jordan Peterson or James Lindsay towards Christians. I've read that from Dawkins. I think he is coming from a condescending place of, I want to enjoy the benefits of Christian culture and I think it's great, but you people who actually believe it are dumb. Like I kind of feel that from him. And we're about to see his response to his friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali. So I think you'll see some of that in there. And a lot of people, the kind of atheists that I think Dawkins is, their mind is not open enough to consider that there are intelligent believers or that being a believer in God does not mean that you need to abandon science, quite the opposite, that you need to abandon a search for truth, which is science, quite the opposite. And so, yeah, I do think that you're right. He seems to conflate atheism with science. He says, he continues, scientism, if you will. Yes. I don't think he's a very sophisticated thinker. I kind of agree with you. I shouldn't say that about Dawkins, but I kind of agree. I think he's got some major blind spots. I'd put it that way. And probably some of his blind spots come with his hubris about his own intelligence and his own, like, where his morals come from. And I'll get into that more a little later. Keto and Crime for $10. Hey, Tracy, good to see you. You guys, if you haven't checked it out, Keto and Crime is a great channel by my friend Tracy, who covers a lot of true crime, one of my guilty pleasures. And good to see you. She says, Dawkins proved himself a fool on this. There is no cultural Christianity without the religion. The culture comes from the religion. They are the same. I'm happy he said it, but it was nonsensical. I think I can understand what you're saying. Yes, he seems, as I just said with the previous super chat from Andrew, I think he has some blind spots, and he sort of doesn't understand that attacking and destroying a faith in God, attacking and trying to destroy Christianity could destroy Christianity. Like, he's sort of like, how did we get here? I want to live in a culturally Christian country. Why are we no longer culturally Christian? Like, dude, because you've been disparaging Christianity for your whole life. I understand that part of it, of what you're saying. So yeah. John Thomas for $10. Thank you, John. Says, Bill Maher and Tim Pool have made the same point. Because Western society gets the concepts of justice and individual rights from Judeo-Christian teachings. Yes, I've seen lots of people like Bill Maher and people who are starting to at least verbally recognize and acknowledge the benefits of living in a Christian culture. I've seen more of that recently. ADL, hey, ADL 1992, thank you for the super chat for $1.99. Says, I'm skeptical of Russell Brand's conversion. Oh, that's another one that I've heard people express skepticism over. And I haven't followed him closely enough. I've seen some videos of his that I've really loved. I haven't followed him closely enough to give you an opinion on that. But just like with Kat Von D and Nala and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, my initial reaction is praise God, until I see something that gives me real pause. But I'm not saying you're wrong to be skeptical of it. I have not been following him closely. John Thomas, thank you for the $5 super chat. Says, also, as to Ali's and other public conversions, only God can judge a penitent heart. So yes, I give benefit of doubt to those who profess their faith. Thank you for that. And Tracy, Keto and Crime, thank you for the $5 super chat. Says, as a former atheist conference circuit builder, I can concur that one of the main tenets of the lefties atheist is narcissist thought. Thank you for that. I think it's rampant in, okay, narcissism is a human condition. It's a human thing. No one has zero narcissism. But I think that the thing about Christianity and a belief in God and holding yourself to something higher and to a way of living that's laid out by a creator and not by you, I think one benefit, a pragmatic benefit to that is that it's intended to, God's trying to rein in the dark parts of your human heart. Like, we all have the capacity for good and evil. God wants you to choose good in all the little choices and the big choices. And I think if you're a sincere believer, you're naturally going to have more constraints on that than someone who doesn't, where there's sort of anything goes, and there's not anything you're holding yourself to that says this is a bad thing, right? And so I think that's probably why you saw that more in those atheist circles you were in, just because you don't have that safeguard or the boundaries that come from a belief in a way of living laid out by a creator. I hope that makes sense. even if you don't agree, folks. I hope I'm articulating it well. John Thomas, member for 3 months. Thank you, John. Says Dawkins wants the benefits of Christian society. Yes, and he's very open about that. He's not claiming otherwise. He's basically saying, I want the benefits of living in a Christian society, although I am not a believer, and although he behaves somewhat contemptuously towards believers. So, to show that, I have to show his response to, we just read that piece by Ayaan Hirsi Ali when she announced that she had converted to Christianity and left atheism in November of 2023. And so Richard Dawkins published this open letter to her, which I thought was kind of, what's the right word here? I don't know, a little unprofessional. I mean, if you're friends and you doubt her conversion, or wouldn't you go to her as a friend privately and have a conversation with her on the phone or email or what have you, or in person, and try and understand it better and talk to her? What he did was sort of rude. He published this challenging essay, basically challenging her and sort of saying he doesn't believe it. And I think he probably did this because, like the atheist friend I mentioned who reacted very negatively to her conversion as if it was a bad thing, it was going to be bad PR for libertarian atheists or something. I think maybe he viewed it in the same way and was like, oh no, we can't lose more of us to God. I better do a response, So I think that's why he did this public response in this way. I could be wrong, but I just thought this was weird. So he responded to her essay in an essay, her friend. Okay, it's called Open Letter from Richard Dawkins to Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And this is November of 2023. Dear Ayaan, again, this is public. You could say it's almost like some of the apostles writing to the whole Dear Corinthians. No, Dear Ayaan. But it's just to her specifically. Dear Ayaan, as you know, you are one of my absolutely favorite people. Okay, but there it is. Oh man, whenever there's a but, it sort of invalidates everything before it sometimes, right? Dear Ayaan, as you know, you're one of my absolutely favorite people, but ... Seriously, Ayaan, you, a Christian? You are no more a Christian than I am. Okay, this is rude. This is so rude. You're my favorite person, but you're a freaking liar. And also, just look at his language. Seriously? It's just that sarcasm and contempt and just rude. Yeah. So, something's happening in the chat. I don't know what it is, but I trust your judgment, Pirate. He says, takes a lot for me to time out someone. I trust your judgment. Okay. He says, you, a Christian, you are no more a Christian than I am. I might agree with you. I actually do. That Putinism, Islamism, and postmodernish wokery-pokery are wokery-pokery is a great turn of phrase, isn't it? Wokery-pokery are three great enemies of decent civilization. I might agree with you that Christianity, if only as a lesser of evils, he calls it an evil there. He calls it an evil. This was only 5 months ago. If only as the lesser of evils, is a powerful weapon against them. I might add that Christianity has been the inspiration for some of the greatest art, architecture, and music the world has ever known. But so what? I'm sorry. It's just funny. Okay, I gotta stop laughing. It just tickles me too much. It's so dismissive. I might add. He's like, yes, it's the only weapon that stands against that we can. It's the only weapon that works against this evil that we agree on exists. Wokery-pokery and Islamism and Putinism, and it's the only weapon, and also it's responsible for some of the greatest art, architecture, and music the world's ever known. And then he says, but so what? I once got into trouble for extolling the beauty of of Winchester Cathedral bells by comparison with the, quote, aggressive sounding yell of Allah Akbar, the last thing you hear before the bomb goes off or before your head rolls away from your body. I might agree, I think I do, although certainly not in its earlier history, that Christianity is morally superior to Islam. I might even agree that Christianity is the bedrock of our civilization. Actually, I don't agree, he says, but even if I did, none of that comes remotely even close to making me or you a Christian, he says. I have seen a very recent film discussion in which you described me as one of the most Christian people you know. This came after you quoted Roger Scruton as saying that saying to you that you act like a Christian, you behave like a Christian, therefore you are a Christian. But Ayaan, that is so wrong. How you or I behave is utterly irrelevant. What matters is what you believe. This is true. Actually, I agree with him as a Christian. It matters that you believe. So where he's at now saying he's a cultural Christian, while I think it's a positive thing, as I've already expressed, because I think it's positive for society to bend towards Christianity, even if most people who will come along are just followers, are just cultural Christians, I think it's a better thing for society, for families, for individuals to live in a Christian civilization. While I think that's a positive, I still think if he doesn't believe, he doesn't know God's salvation, he's not going to be I don't believe he's going to be united with God. When we leave this earth, I think it matters what we believed while we were here about God. Of course I do. He says so I agree with him on that. But what I don't agree with is that he's judging what she believes. He's telling her what she believes. He's telling her that she's just like him. No, you can't have found God, Ayaan. You have to be just like me, be a cultural Christian. That's basically what he's saying. He's saying he's even going further and saying, I know it's a lie. I know you're lying, basically. He says, what matters is what you believe. What matters is the truth claims about the world which you think are true. For that is the whole point. Christianity makes factual claims, truth claims that Christians believe, truth claims that define them as Christian. Christians are theists. They believe in a divine father figure who designed the universe, listens to our prayers, and is privy to our every thought. You surely don't believe that. That's what he says, as if that's so crazy. You surely don't believe that, Ayaan. This is where the condescension comes in that I mentioned that he seems to have. Do you believe Jesus rose from the grave 3 days after being placed there? I do. He says, of course you don't. He probably is. It's from that condescending place where he thinks she's too smart to believe. And he, as Andrew said in his super chat, he thinks that atheism that has the market on science and intellect, and that if you are an intellectual person, you can't believe in God. I think that's where this is coming from. His identity's wrapped up in that, by the way, probably being a very smart person. He says, of course you don't believe that. Do you believe Jesus was born to a virgin? Certainly not. How does he know what she believes? Someone of your intelligence, there it is. It's exactly what I thought it was. Someone of your intelligence does not believe you have an immortal soul. What? This fear, this arrogance, and it is a fear. It's a small person's fear of what others think of them, of others thinking they're dumb. This unfortunately is like a wall that prevents so many people of higher intellect. It prevents them from actually opening their mind, using their brain, opening their heart, and opening their mind to the possibility of God. They're so locked in this prison of, I'm so intelligent, therefore I can never open these prison walls to that possibility because then I'll look dumb. Then I'll look all these things. And it's because of prejudice that he has towards people who are believers. I was very fortunate when I first found God, when I moved to Texas from Los Angeles. I started hosting these. I was in the middle of leaving my social justice ideology, and I was in the middle of finding God. I was on this path. I had started going to a spiritual center in Los Angeles, and when I moved to Austin, I continued to try. I was just searching. I was going to different churches. I was going to a spiritual center for a while. I went to a Catholic church for a while. I started going to an evangelical Christian church, and I started hosting these dinners. Separate from that, I was hosting these dinners called civility dinners for people on the right and left to come together and have conversations over dinner and try and meet people who are different from you, who disagree with you. And I'm so lucky because one of the couples I met through that really challenged a lot of the stereotypes I had, that I still had, even though I'd had an experience with God before I left LA. I still had, as I said, you lose things that you clung to in your old life slowly as God convicts you. And I still had this prejudiced opinion towards believers. I still did. And there was probably part of me that was still, hung up on, probably not wanting people to know that I believed in God now, because it was like, oh God, what if they think I'm dumb? So it's ego. It's ego. It's fragile ego. Who cares if they think you're dumb? I'm very fortunate that one of the couples who started coming to my dinners, they are strong believers. They are very discerning, very wise, and two of the smartest people I've ever met. And it's amazing when you meet someone like that who challenges a lot of stereotypes that you have, because they are a living contradiction to these untrue beliefs that you're carrying around with you. I was coming from a place of being a leftist where you just automatically judge IQ based on a certain thing, but you also judge it based on prestige. And it was like, oh, this guy went to Dartmouth. That shocked me that he was such a believer. I know that it's embarrassing to admit, but it's true. Now, of course, I know some of the smartest people I know are believers, but at that time I didn't know very many. I'm coming out of this cult of 20 years in the social justice woke cult. I had been very prejudiced towards Christianity, towards God. I had been living in this echo chamber of people who only agreed with me. And so I had these dumb prejudiced beliefs. And I say all this because I think that Richard Dawkins has some of these dumb prejudiced beliefs, and it functions as a prison for him, where he can't imagine someone who's intelligent, who he respects, like his friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali, actually believing. Why? Because she's intelligent. Now think about how having that kind of prejudice would constrain him. How could a person like him, if he ever had an experience with God where the Holy Spirit washed over him, where imagine how hard that would be for him to talk about it, or to even to acknowledge it, or to accept it himself. It's sort of a self-defeating thing. You're sort of shutting that door completely, because your identity is built, in his case, built on being so intelligent. And to him, intelligent means you can't believe in God. I mean, he just says it outright. Someone of your intelligence does not believe you have an immortal soul, which will survive the decay of your brain. I do believe we are more than physical bodies and computer brains. I think intelligence led me to that belief. I can't look around at the world that we're in. I can't describe human consciousness and what sets us apart from animals, other than that there is something within us that we can't entirely explain, that is the spark of a creator. That makes sense to me. I don't think the Big Bang brought everything into existence, everything that you see around you. And I was a biological anthropology major. Okay. He says, someone of your intelligence does not believe you have an immortal soul, which will survive the decay of your brain. Christians believe in a frightful place called hell, where the souls of the wicked go after they are dead. Do you believe that? Hell no. He's telling her what she believes. Christians believe every baby is born in sin and is saved from hell only by the redemptive and preemptive, in the case of all those born Anno Domini, execution of Jesus. Do you believe anything close to that nasty scapegoat theory? Of course you don't. Of course you don't. How does he know? Ayaan, you are no more Christian than I am, he says. You make an additional claim, which my respect for you finds more incredible. Quote, I have also turned to Christianity because I ultimately found life without any spiritual solace unendurable, indeed very nearly self-destructive, end quote. So you need a religion of some kind, and Christianity seems the least bad alternative. That's not what she's saying. Ayaan, I have always thought of you as one of the bravest people I know. How could you succumb to such weakness? How could you succumb to such weakness? This is very relevant to the sermon my pastor gave yesterday, because he calls her brave. And my pastor at Church on the Square, he was talking about how the difference between courage and recklessness. And he said many times something that's reckless can look like bravery in the modern world, and something that's actually brave can look reckless. And how do you tell the difference? And he boiled it down to the ways in which real courage, real bravery are different from being reckless is that they have a foundation in something true. They have a foundation in God, and they also have a different ends. And I don't want to get too far off this subject, but when he posts that sermon, I'll put it in the comments here because I think it's really relevant here. Richard Dawkins thinks it's brave to go through life with an insistence, not just an absence of belief in God, but an insistence that there is no possibility of a God. He thinks that's brave. He thinks it's brave to, as Bertrand Russell said, to say something like, when I die, I rot, I'm going bravely into the casket. I don't think that's actually brave. I think it's fearful. I do. I think it's sort of this, how did my pastor put it yesterday? This delusion that I will remain in control of my destiny into even into the casket. Well, you're not in control. You're not in control. You're dying. You're not in control of what happens. Humans have this need to be in control at all times, and that's what leads to fear, I think. And so sometimes we try and pretend like we have control over things that we don't. You see this a lot if you go to something like AA, where you see the devastating effects of humans trying and failing to control everything in their life. A big part of the reason that people come to rely on crutches like alcohol, addictions, things like that, is, I think, because of that fear at knowing that there are things that are out of our control. So he continues. Now he's quoting her. And this part that was so meaningful to me, that she said, atheism failed to answer a simple question: what is the meaning and purpose of life? And so Dawkins continues, for my part, I have found various things that give my life meaning and purpose. There's science, and my books have expounded my lifelong quest to understand the meaning and purpose of all life. Then there's human love. There's the beauty of a child, a tropical swim under the stars, a ravishing sunset, a Schubert quartet. There's the art and literature of all the world, the warmth of an intimate embrace. So many of these things he's mentioning are pleasures and joys. And God wants us to experience pleasure and joy. He does. But pleasure and joy and even happiness are different than meaning and purpose. So I see a distinction here between some of these things. Love, God is love. And I do agree that I do agree that's meaning and purpose. Love gives you meaning and purpose. But he would disagree, obviously. But I think right there, he didn't even realize it. He's talking about God a little bit, in my opinion. Okay. But even if all such things leave you cold, and of course they don't, even if you feel a ravenous need for more, what on earth does that have to do with the truth claims of Christianity or any other religion? Excuse me. Even if life were intolerably bleak and empty, it isn't. But even if it were, how could anyone twist a need for solace into a belief in scriptural truth claims about the universe simply because they make you feel good? Intelligent people don't believe something because it comforts them. They believe it because, and only because, they have seen evidence that supports it. This is one of the biggest gaps between believers and non-believers, and I think it always will be, just in the conversations I've had with friends who don't believe, trying to explain to a non-believer that I have seen evidence to support the existence of God in my personal life is it's almost impossible, because they don't know it. They don't understand it until they've experienced it. Um, the evidence that you can give in your life of things that led you to see God at work, they're always going to be able to write off as coincidence or something that didn't really happen, or delusion, or being a Pollyanna and wanting to believe, or something like that. And that's okay. I completely understand why they can write it off that way. I think that's why it takes faith. If it were evident, obviously, to everyone that God exists, then it would be a no-brainer. There would be no leap of faith, that leap of delight that happens. It would just be, it would be almost like no free will on the matter, like automatons, like you must believe. So yeah, that's hard to explain. So this, I think, is a chasm that between him and his friend Ayaan may not ever be bridged, unless and until it happens to him. He says, "No, Ayaan, you are not a Christian." Oh God, it's so rude. He's so rude. "You are just a decent human being who mistakenly thinks you need a religion in order to remain so." No, that's not what it is, dude. It's not what it is. And then he says, "With my love, Richard. P.S. Would you like to have a recorded conversation for us both to put on our social medias?" Okay, that's it. That's the very condescending, "How could you? Of course you don't believe. How could you believe? I know you don't believe." That's his sort of contemptuous response to his friend upon her saying, "I'm leaving atheism and I'm become a Christian." I'm just checking out what you guys are saying in case I missed anything. Pirate Tomsky, hey Pirate, says Dawkins is just doing what he's always done, in my opinion, attack people of faith. That's what all the militant atheists do. Yeah, which is so surprising though, isn't it, Pirate, that now he's saying, "I am a cultural Christian, though. I would still like to live in a Christian culture." Lily of the Fox Valley, why does he need her so badly not to believe? This is a great question. I'm going to tell you what I think. I think because it's a reflection. It's like a mirror. She's a mirror. It's showing him what he's insecure about with himself. It goes back to that thing about how he thinks of himself. His identity is, I think, clearly rooted in his view of himself as a highly intelligent person, and he believes that being a highly intelligent person is contingent upon no possibility of a belief in a God, like no possibility at all. And because of those prejudiced beliefs that he has towards people who believe, he can't reconcile the two things in his mind. On the one hand, he's got, my very smart friend, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, is now a Christian. On the other hand, he's got very smart people cannot be Christians. And so he can't reconcile those two. And so rather than be curious and interact with her in a place of good faith, trying to understand better and asking her questions as you would do in a private conversation with a friend, trying to understand the conversion better, even if you can't, but trying to. He's not doing that. He's instead going to this place of, I must reject everything in front of my eyes. I must reject my friend's statement of beliefs. And essentially, I must think of my friend, who I've called in this essay a very good person, one of my best friends, someone I love a lot. I must call her a liar. I must do that to protect this belief structure that I have of, that smart people can't be believers. It's psychological. If he were to knock down that part, I think that's such a foundational part of his house of belief, that intelligent people can't believe in God, that if he were to get rid of that, it would knock down his whole. Of course it would. It would destroy his whole house. It would raise his house of belief to the ground, and he would be starting where I was starting, at ground zero of, like, what do I believe? Is there a God? Do we have a soul? What's the purpose of life? He would have to start from ground zero, and he's spent his whole life and career living in this house of belief, right? The house of belief that it's dumb to believe in God, that an intelligent person can't believe in God. So what does he do? He rejects what she says. He has to. He has to think of her now as a liar. It's crazy, right? It's almost like, this isn't a great analogy. It's not an apples for apples analogy, but it reminds me of also when I got sober. Almost everyone in my life was very positive and encouraging about it, by the way. But there was one person, two people, one in particular, who it really bothered this person. And I think it was because this person had insecurities about themselves and their amount of drinking, and that they couldn't wrestle with. And to see me quit drinking was like a mirror reflecting back the things they didn't like about themselves. So they felt judgment or something in me quitting drinking, even though I wasn't judging them at all. This is just about me over here, right? And so that one person was very negative about it and was always trying to get me to drink again. Because I think maybe it said something about, like, hey, it's not impossible for you. Maybe that person was having feelings that they were uncomfortable with about the possibility of being able to quit drinking. And maybe they believed they couldn't or something. I don't know. But it was a very negative reaction. And so it kind of, that comes to mind for some reason with this, because her conversion really bothers him, doesn't it? Maybe it's causing him to ask questions that he doesn't want to ask himself, like uncomfortable questions. Ron Copperman says, you guys are missing it. He has a crush on her and he doesn't want to see her go. That's my theory. That's probably part of it too. He wants to think of her as on his team, right? We are the very smart atheist libertarians or classical liberals, and now we're losing you. That's probably how he thinks of it too. You're right. Pirate, you have some supers you missed. Thank you so much. Let me see. Keto and Crime for $10. Thank you, Tracy. Says, Keri, have you ever heard of Atheists for Liberty? I have. A great bunch of non-woke atheists. Check them out. They would fit in great with the community here. I know the founder if you want to chat with him. Yes. Yes, I have a couple friends in Atheists for Liberty. Thank you. That would be nice to have a conversation with one of them sometime. Thank you, Tracy. Jardum for £5. Can you do a stream about letting go of alcohol? I'm struggling. Dude, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't want to derail this one too much, and there's so much I could say about this, so I'll take your advice. I'll do a whole stream about it, because in my experience, when I talk about it, it helps people. I've heard from people who have other addictions that say it helped. So I will do that. What I'll say now is I will pray for you because you're struggling, and I know what that struggle is like. And it's not an easy thing. And in my experience, I don't know what your particular triggers are or your mental block, whatever it is that's holding you in that prison, because it was a prison. I viewed it was a prison. And we can have ourselves in many different kinds of prisons. You know, you can be a slave to lots of different kinds of things, but I was a slave to alcohol. And I don't know what's holding you there, but in case this helps, one of the things that helped me was there were two things. One was I heard a Jordan Peterson lecture where he was talking about we all have one thing that comes to mind immediately that we can think of that we might that we think if we gave this thing up, we might be in a better place in 1 year without it. And he said, in the audience, you know, everyone can think of that one thing. And I'm sure for everyone, something different was popping up. And for me, it was alcohol. And he said, why not try giving that thing up just for 1 year? You don't have to say forever, right? For 1 year and see where you are after that year. And if you're in a better place, why not try giving it up for 5 years? And after 5 years, if you're in an even better place, why not try giving it up for 10 years? And so that stuck with me because for me, one of my struggles, I think, was that it was hard for me it was such a crutch that I couldn't envision never having it again. And that was a hard thing for me to say. And so just in terms of how you conceptualize it, if that's something that's hard for you, I don't know if it'll help or not, but it might help to think of it as I'm just going to give this up for a year. And I will tell you in my experience, so my husband and I quit drinking together, and it didn't even take a year to know that we weren't going back in our case. It was like a few months in, I was like, I know already that I've come this far. I'm not going back. And so a year came. Yes, a much better place, like a different life almost. And then we're approaching, it's going to be 5 years this October, end of October for me, early November for him. And it's just such a different place. And so maybe that'll help you. The other thing that helped me, and again, maybe this will help you, maybe it won't. I was listening to a lot of videos. Maybe you've done this too, where you're trying to quit something, you're going to YouTube and you're looking for videos like, how do I quit this? Or do I have a problem with this? Or how can you tell? And so one of the places I had lived in for a long time was ambivalence about it. Meaning I had not settled on an opinion. Sometimes I would think I had a drinking problem. Other times I would think I didn't. And I would go back and forth. Is this a problem? Is it not? And I would often look at, you know, I had never had some of these experiences other people had where it was, you know, clearly they had a problem. And so I would say, well, I'm not like that. I'm not that bad. I'll tell you right now, there's always that's a trap door. You can always point to someone else who's worse. And that doesn't say anything about you. You can always find someone who's worse, a scapegoat, if you will. But I was in that place. And one of the things I heard, I found a YouTube video of a radio call-in show, and it was a chaplain giving advice. And this guy called in at like 2 a.m. Of course, I'm listening to this years later on YouTube, but this guy called in the radio show and he was asking the chaplain if he had a drinking problem. And he said, here's how much I weigh. Here's how much I drink. Can you tell me if this is a problem or not? And the chaplain said, I don't need to know how much you drink or how much you weigh. No one who doesn't have a drinking problem calls into a radio program at 2 a.m. to ask if they have a drinking problem. And that switched something in my brain, because at that point I gave up the ambivalence period, that had the limbo I had been in for so long, trying to justify that that's not a problem. Oh yeah, there is. There's not. I gave it up because at that point it was like, none of that stuff matters. It's clearly a problem for me. I've come back to it so many times, so I need to do something about it. Maybe that'll help you if you've been in that place to answer that question for yourself. And my husband and I will pray for you tonight. Jardum. I will do a whole episode about this, I promise you. Maybe my husband would be on it with me. Pear Tree, thank you for the super chat for $19.99. Pear Tree says, great broadcast. Well, thank you. Thank you for the encouraging words. I have something else pulled up. Now, this is a short clip. I've shown it before in a previous episode. It's very short. I think it's a minute. So we're going to show it one more time. This is James Lindsay on Joe Rogan very recently. Actually, it's a 2-minute, 57-second clip. And I want to show this one because I think my spidey sense says there's something going on. There's a lot of atheists who are now, as I said at the beginning, opening their mind to the possibility of God, and or if not that, at least publicly acknowledging the benefits and the positive things, the values of living in a Christian society. And I think that's positive because I agree with them. It is better to live in a Christian society. I believe that's true. And so this has been happening for a while. There's something going on. And I do think God is working on some of these people. I do. So this is James Lindsay. Now he's saying one of the things, basically echoing one of the things that Ayaan Hirsi Ali was saying in her essay that we just read, and that Richard Dawkins echoed when he was replying to her about Christianity as a belief system being a weapon against totalitarianism. And I think James Lindsay explains his reasoning on that very well. And again, this is another atheist who's saying something positive about cultural Christianity or about Christianity as a belief system. And so maybe this will appeal to atheists. Here, we're going to play this.
So the people who go along with it, who are in the cult, are treated as people, and the people who don't go along with it have to be treated as non-people. And that's Mao Zedong gave a famous speech in 1957 where he actually said, to not have a correct political orientation is like not having a soul. So you're no better than a capitalist running dogs. You're no better than the dogs. Well, I mean, we like dogs, but you know what I mean, how he would have meant it. And so it's like, you're no better than an animal if you don't go along with this. And that's what you're saying. That's a cult. And all this bears the hallmarks of a cult.
And it feels like that is a natural pattern that humans fall into. And I think particularly if you're not religious, I think one of the things about religious people is they've already got their thing. So, and hopefully it's one that promotes good values and it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But there's a part in the brain that wants that thing.
Yeah.
And atheists, they don't have a religion. And so they find a social religion. They find
social religion. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So they find it in their social circumstances, politics, economics, and it always goes demonic when they do that. I've been spending a lot of time, thanks to Charlie Kirk, I've been spending a lot of time paying attention to the tenets of Christianity and studying it. And it's got a lot of good advice in there. But you're 100% right that if you try to lack a religion, and the primary thing with the religion, so if you lack a religion, then it'll get filled in with other things for very many people. I think there's a small percentage of people for maybe that doesn't apply, but
there's a spot.
I'm pausing it here because this is what I told you. This is kind of what he said on my channel on Deprogrammed when we had the conversation with my pastor, Bradley Helgerson, and James, is he was sort of agreeing that, my pastor believes, and I believe, that humans are designed by our creator to worship. And that if you are not aiming that in the right place, then you will fill it in. Human nature will fill it in with other things. We need ritual. We need to worship. And I believe that. And so he's sort of agreeing with that here as well. And with the same caveat he made on my show, which is that I think he has to understand, or I think he agrees, but then how does he explain himself? Because he doesn't believe in God. And so he's sort of saying, but some of us, like maybe a very small minority of us, don't need that or don't need to worship. That's what he's saying there. Pirate. You can worship me all you want. All hail the mods. All hail the mods. That's true. Give it up for Pirate.
Not in your brain for it.
But the thing that, why do they go after Christians and Jews so hard everywhere they go? And the reason is because they are completely committed to, they're not, when you say, they already have their thing, for Christians and Jews, that's not how they think about God. It's not their thing. That's something that's above everything else.
Well, the Muslims as well.
Well, Muslims too. But Islam's a little bit different because it's got a political element worked into it. And I'm not trying to like throw shade. I'm just saying that with the state is never above God in Christianity and Judaism, ever. The state and God are somewhat intertwined, or can be in Islam, but it's not. So they're not quite identical, but it's true. The God is above state, no question. So when the state shows up and says to you, hey, you're going to do X, Y, Z, or else, and it goes against your religion, if you're a Christian or Jew, and to many, if it's not Islam, a Muslim, you're going to say, no, I have a higher duty, and it's not to the state. And if you kill me, I'm going to a better place, so I don't care. And that's the enemy of totalitarianism in a way that nothing else is.
Yes.
The Confucian virtues of China don't have that. Buddhism actually kind of doesn't have that.
You can't donate today. Don't even think about it.
And we got Trump there at the end. Have you guys, speaking of political ads, I really hate this thing. I saw Chrissy Mayer's husband, Frank, tweet about this the other day. I really hate this thing they're doing now where they text you. You know, I don't want to get a text pretending like it's from any politician, Biden or Trump or Ted Cruz or whoever, where it comes into my inbox and it's like, Keri, I'm gonna fight, and I'm like, stop it. Don't text me. Anyway, these ads, I can't wait till this political season's over. So that quote, that piece of the interview on Rogan, I think is so important because, again, I agree with him. I think James Lindsay speaks a lot of truth. And again, I think truth is God. And so I think in his own way, he is pursuing God, although he probably wouldn't agree with that characterization. But he speaks a lot of truth. He talks about the importance of discernment for Christians. And here he's coming to this conclusion that it may be that a belief in God is the only weapon against totalitarianism. And he has I completely agree with him, because you do believe in something bigger than the state. That's true bravery and courage. I was talking earlier about my pastor's sermon about the difference between recklessness and courage. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that story from the Bible where they walk into the fiery furnace and say, if it's God's will, he'll save us. Like, they have that much faith in something true, in something that they know to be true, in God. It's very different than this sort of recklessness of I'll be my own God. I'll believe what I choose. I'll decide what my morals are, and I believe in moral relativity and blah 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 blah. That's I think very reckless way to live, and to think you're being brave because I don't need to believe in God. I'll go. What did Bertrand Russell say in that quote we read? When I die, I shall rot. Okay, very sure about that. But I think that bravery, that sort of that belief in something bigger than yourself, a creator, a moral code where your morals come from, and you hold yourself to that moral code, or you try to. I think that is, like he said, the antidote to totalitarianism, because there's nothing they can take from you. Here's the truth as a believer in Christ, I'll tell you, and a non-believer, maybe even friends who want to believe, maybe they can't believe this. I don't know, but this is true. There is nothing anyone can take from me. That's an amount of freedom that I never had before I was a believer. There's nothing, and they can take things from me. Yes. What I'm saying is there's nothing they can take from me that is worth more than my faith in God. If they take my job in this woke cancel culture, if they take my sense of security, if they take my good name and smear and defame me, if they take, if they confiscate, some people, they're confiscating bank accounts and their money. If they take whatever they take, my life, anything they can take from you as a human, and they can take lots of things, is not worth more than your relationship and your belief in God. And even if you're not a believer, I think it's possible to see, as James does, how that is freedom. Because I will not comply with things I find to be against his word. I will not be a part of it. No matter what they threaten. It's laughable. And I think he's right. That's why they come for Christianity so hard. Because they can't control that. Look at how they treat Christians in communist China. Look at how, the Christians who practice underground in Iran. I interviewed, gosh, I'm blanking on her name. I have an interview with a woman, I think her Dr. Naz. Oh, man, I'm so embarrassed. I'll have to put it below. Maybe one of the mods can find it. But she told her life story of escaping Iran when she was a child and about how people would worship there in secret, how Jews would worship in secret, and because it was such an enemy. It was considered a belief in God, such an enemy of the state. And I do. I think it's the ultimate weapon to totalitarianism. It's the antidote. It's freedom. It's freedom from anything that man can force on you or do to you or try to make you afraid of. It's freedom from all of that. Because your identity and your soul and who you are, and none of that is wrapped up in man. It's wrapped up in God, something bigger. The Hidden Bee, 23 for $5. Keri, you should try to have John Cooper, the lead singer for Skillet. You and him call out a lot of the same things, and I think you'd have good talks. Oh, I don't have my pen. I got to write this one down. Pirate, can you remind me of this one? I don't even know this band, I'm ashamed to admit, so I appreciate the recommendation. I don't think anybody's recommended this person before, and I do want to check them out. Thank you. Thank you for the super chat. Z-Man for $10 with a quote from Martin Luther. There are only two religions in the world, one of grace and everything else. It's a great quote. Thank you for that. Super Based. The membership fairy's here again. I was wondering if you were here. Super Base gifted 5 memberships. Thank you for that. Thanks for being generous. Squat and P says, God is definitely working on people. Have you seen the video of Rosalind Picard, the scientist and atheist turned Christian? She's extremely intelligent like James. I have not, and I would love to see that. I do. I agree with you, Squat and P. Something is happening. And even in this interview that we started the whole show with, Richard Dawkins talking about the declining numbers of people in church, I know that's happening. I've looked at the stats too, but I also think we're in the midst of a revival. So how are both of those things true? Here's how they're true. You know how I said, like, whatever's culturally dominant, then the majority of people get on board, right? And they're just casually there. They're just conformists. So right now, woke social justice, that's the dominant religion. So the majority of people in the West are just getting casually on board. But they're not sincere believers. They don't believe strongly. They'll go wherever culture goes, right? The same thing is true, as I said. I think the same thing is true for Christianity. And so since Christianity is declining, it's no longer the dominant religion. You're seeing all of those people, the wheat and the chaff, being separated. All of those people who just follow and conform are leaving the church. Of course they are. They're leaving. They're going to other places like woke. They're going to what's culturally popular. They're doing what they do. They're following. And so, yes, the numbers of people going to and attending church are falling. The number of people who say they're Christian, of course, it's falling. But in terms of sincere believers, I'm drawing a distinction here. Real believers, I think the numbers are growing. In terms of conversions, I think the numbers are growing. The wheat and the chaff. Look at someone like me. It was the last place I would have ever imagined myself as being in this life, or being a believer in God, or going to a church every Sunday and being excited about going to church, like really excited, happy to go, upset if I don't get to go. Never thought that would happen. Like excited to hear a sermon and to think about the topics raised and to read the scripture and to learn more, and excited to have fellowship with my fellow Christians and, to follow this path. I never thought that would be me. And there are more people like me every day there are more people finding God, people who are the last people you would ever expect. And these are not casual I didn't convert because Christianity suddenly became very popular. It's the opposite. It's not popular anymore. It's not a conformist thing. It's not a casual thing. It was the result of serious, heart-wrenching, dark, grappling with very dark things and thoughtfulness and intention, and a conversion and an experience with God, a conversion moment with God. And I think the people that you're seeing now who are finding God, or even who are curious about God, and the atheists who are curious and say, I want to understand more, be gracious with those friends. Invite them to church. And if, God willing, they have an experience with God and they come to you one day and they say, I found God, I'm a Christian, praise God. Don't treat them with scorn and derision, like, why haven't you changed your hair color yet? Or whatever people are doing in this Nala girl. Treat them with, like the prodigal son, with love and acceptance. Like, thank God you're home. Let's have a party. until you see evidence otherwise. Pray for good fruit. Pray that it's sincere. I think there's a secret revival happening, even with, and it makes sense to me actually, with the declining numbers and popularity of Christianity or people attending church as they're falling off because it's not culturally popular anymore and going to other than but the sincere, the people who are looking for meaning and truth, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali said, meaning, truth, purpose, they're finding God, or they're at least opening their mind to the possibility, and that's a wonderful thing. I'm going to end it here. I had another video that I'll save for another time from Jordan Peterson talking about Christianity. We'll save that for another time, but I really enjoyed hanging out with you guys today, and thank you for your patience and helping me and letting me untangle my thoughts on this, because sometimes it's a mess of different things I'm thinking about, and I'm trying to put it to, I can see things sometimes on a big picture scale, and then I'm like, how do I say this? Like what it is, how it is that I understand this topic. Thank you for the super sticker. Your average Patriot Nerve for $1.99. Oh, you've nailed it, Therese. The churches are preaching woke, and that turns people off. Yes, you've got all these churches. It's like they're sort of empty husks. They're whitewashed tombs. They've been taken over by the social justice woke virus, and it's rotted them from the inside out. And they're preaching nothing. They're preaching the same thing the world is preaching, nothing. And people are leaving those churches. Of course they are. Of course they are. They offer nothing. When I started finding God, I had people invite me to some churches like that. Like, oh, are you interested? I would meet people, sometimes people who are casually woke, and they'd be like, oh, you should come to my church. It's really open and affirming. And I was like, how do I say no politely? Like, that's what I'm escaping. It's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for God. God is judgment and love. I'm looking for the judgment too. I'm not looking for open and affirming and whatever. I'm looking for truth, even when it's painful. Even if I don't think I can follow it today, I'm going to try tomorrow. That kind of thing. I'm looking for truth. And I think the people finding God now, that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for woke repackaged with, a God sticker on it, which is taking God's name in vain. Thank you for that, Therese. I completely agree. Kendra, so happy for this opportunity to listen today. Thanks, Keri, for letting God use you here. Thank you. Thank you for the encouragement. And thank you to Pirate Tomsky, our mod, and thank you to all the atheists who hung out and who tolerate Keri getting in her Jesus feels. Okay. Have a nice rest of your day. I will see you on Wednesday. We're doing 2 back-to-back shows. Wednesday at 6 o'clock Central, we're doing a live That Christian panel with myself, Michelle from Force of Light Entertainment, Brahmable, Odin from OMB Reviews, and a couple special guests to be announced. We're going to be discussing the movie Cabrini. If you haven't seen it yet, it's in theaters. It's put out by Angel Studios. Go and do a date night. Go see Cabrini and join us on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. And then at 8 o'clock, right after, we're going to be doing a live pop culture, myself and Mystery Chris. So I hope to see you at one of those. And take care. Have a good rest of your Monday. See you later.